So I also, had weeks that had like three or four diagnoses categories. This week we only have one, and there's a number of reasons for that. Um, I think that this week we're going to talk about human sexuality. It's a difficult subject for many people. Um, and there's a lot to this one subject. So I thought we'd dedicate one class to it. Um, the uh, the other thing I decided was because it's only a 7 week semester, um, we will not have a discussion post the final week because I'm guessing everybody will be writing their paper that week, and you're going to be turning in your paper the last week, the last class. So I'll unlock the Dropbox and just, submit a Word document to the Dropbox. I can't read like a Google document or something like that. It's you just have to upload a Word document. Um, it can't even be like OneDrive. You just have to save the document and upload it. Um, but yeah, so um, no discussion post week 7. Um, and you'll just write your paper that week. So you're gonna start it now, but um, all right. So that's the thing with the paper, with any questions about the rest of the semester. We've got tonight, and then we've got two more classes. When you, on our last class, I do have a topic for the last class, but also I just want everybody to take, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes and share a little bit about their paper, how you went about the diagnosis, who's your character. Sometimes, some semesters, I have you kind of give examples of some things the character did and the diagnosis and the criteria, and I have people guess who the character is. Maybe that'll be fun. Maybe we'll do that. Um, let's see. Some people pick some esoteric characters, which is kind of fun. Um, all right. I think that's about all the housekeeping. I want to kind of just share the screen and look at the syllabus one more time. Just kind of look at what our final subjects are for the rest of the semester. Oh, all of you should have your feedback from the last discussion board post. So you should be able to read those. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about sexual disorders. Um, Next week, uh, we're going to talk about eating disorders, but also self-injury like cutting. Um, I have my own uh, theory on cutting, and I think they're just starting to come out with some studies on it, but how cutting has a lot of similarities with addiction, um, because it activates certain parts of our brain and it produces endorphins and other types of brain chemicals that can be addictive. Um, the and then so because of the cutting, I also include the cycle of addiction. I don't talk about addiction very much because we have a whole class on addiction. So, and we also have a addiction certificate. So, and then the last week, I'll open up the final paper Dropbox. I have like final words for the semester. Good job, guys. Um, you know, and and my final thoughts on the DSM. And we're going to share the paper. So that's the last week. So we're kind of winding down, and but I do have it's like a 45-minute video lecture on sexual disorders. There's notes. The one thing I would like you all, you can't watch it. Well, I'll show you what it is. So this is the best documentary on homosexuality in the DSM. And you just click the link and you click play and you listen to it because it was made for radio. It's This American Life. And they had a whole interview with the past president of APA, the American Psychiatric Association. And he talks about how they removed homosexuality as a diagnosis. And, that's huge. So I just wanted you to hear the history of that from basically one of many people that made it happen. Yeah, and you can listen to it in your car or whatever. The other thing I have on here, there are not a lot of good videos on human sexuality. Um, but I found the best video I could. Um, it's not as new as I would like, but I wanted to get it from the library for a number of reasons. The first reason is if it's in the library, nobody can criticize me for using it. And um, if it's also in the library, I think it has some type of scholarly basis. So, I think it's a good video to watch. However, my lecture and the video from the library and even the This American Life radio program, don't listen to them around kids. These are adult topics, and so, make sure you're not listening or watching to them around young children. Um, I know that a lot of students have commented, "Oh, Grafton, your voice just puts my kids to sleep. I just listen to you at bedtime." But nope, not with this subject. All right. Um, so, all right. So I think that what I'd like to do tonight, since the video really is kind of the points of the lecture, I'd just like to talk about some other things in class. And um, I guess I'd like to kind of share my view of human sexuality. Uh, so um, my very first job, and I might talk about this in the class video, but my very first job was in a very rural area in Gettysburg, PA, central PA. And it happens to be a fairly conservative area. And most of the therapists at the agency where I worked, um, they wanted clients that had fairly common diagnoses like ADHD or couples therapy or um, just kids who had gotten in trouble in some way or referrals. Um, but I thought that all of the other diagnoses were a little more interesting. And I was one of the few pretty liberal counselors in that agency. So I think I got all of the interesting clients, all the ones I really enjoyed working with. Uh, so now this was a long time ago. This was back 1992, something like that. Um, and so, over 30 years ago. So lots changed since then. But one of the things I was able to do was I saw all of the all of the individuals who were pursuing sex change operation or LGBTQ, and basically all of the diagnoses where people were having sexual problems, um, whether they were physical or emotional or a combination of both. Um, and, I found that fulfilling because there was a psychiatrist that worked at the agency. And because I was a new therapist, I had just gotten gotten a job there, and it was my first job as a therapist. And so I got to work really closely with a psychiatrist. And so I was able to learn quite a bit. Not only did I have uh, clients with these diagnoses, but I kind of had regular supervision from this psychiatrist because he knew that I was new and, um, you know, so things are different now. Back then, an individual needed to dress and live as the gender um, that they thought they were and wanted to become physically through the operation for a year. And they had to go to therapy for a year. And me and a psychiatrist had to sign off um, on that, the individual was emotionally healthy and this was a sound decision on their part. I think that's a little extreme, but um, as the psychiatrist explained it to me back then there was a high percentage of individuals who had had operations and they were not happy after they had the operation. It wasn't um, the closure that they thought they would find. Um, and so they regretted it. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to reverse these operations. So they just wanted to make sure that it was the right thing for that client. Um, it's not that anybody had anything against having an operation or anything like that. It's just that, it was almost impossible to reverse at that time. So they wanted to make sure that it was the right thing for that client. Um, Now things have, uh, become a lot more, uh, I would say a lot less stringent with that, which is probably a good thing. Um, but I think my whole point of this is that I really enjoyed working with all of the clients. And I think the most important thing that I learned was not about all of the medical stuff that was involved or um, like if an individual had a sexual disorder that was caused by, a physical problem, we had to learn all that. But I think the most important thing that I learned was that in order to have successful uh, counseling with an individual, um, trust was probably the most important thing to build with an individual. And I think one of the biggest things with human sexuality, I was very fortunate. The Pennsylvania LPC does not require uh, counseling and human sexuality, of course. Other states do. Um, so, like, it is not included in our current curriculum, uh, but we do offer it every other year during the winter semester for those individuals who want to take it, especially if they want to move to another state where it's required. Dr. Gruber usually teaches that class. And so you can always take it before you graduate if you need it. Um, it was part of the curriculum at my school for my master's degree, and I was really glad I had that class. I could have learned everything about the diagnoses from a book, but that's not what I really liked about the class. Most what I liked about the class was finding a comfort level when talking about human sexuality. So back then, uh, it was a lot harder to talk about death and grief and loss. Um, and they used to call that the elephant in the room. And now it's gotten a lot better, a lot easier to talk about grief and loss. But human sexuality is still a difficult thing. People feel uncomfortable talking about human sexuality. So the second thing I learned um, was I would take any couple for couples therapy, not just heterosexual couples, but any couple. And and I took heterosexual couples as well. But the one thing I learned in couples therapy is that so many couples felt uncomfortable talking about human sexuality, even with each other. Um, so, building that trusting relationship, me feeling comfortable about it because, it's just part of being a human being, um, help them to feel more comfortable about it. Uh, so I guess the thing I'd like to encourage you to do is figure out what makes you uncomfortable right now. Is it some subject like human sexuality in counseling? Is it a subject like grief and loss? Um, is it maybe a topic within those subjects? But figure out what you might be uncomfortable discussing with clients and then figure out how are you going to become more comfortable talking about that subject. Um, because your comfort level is quite important. Because if you're not comfortable, if you're anxious about talking about it, your clients are going to be anxious about the subject as well. The so I just want to share the next thing I found out, and that is when couples would come to me and they would want to address a sexual issue. I never once, well, I wanted to figure out whether it was emotional or whether it was a physical issue. If it was physical issue, I also send them to a medical doctor and work with them. But so that I had to figure that out first. But after the first session, really, um, And this bothered them, all of them at first, because they wanted to deal with the problem, the sexual problem, whatever it was. But I rarely talked about the sexual problem until later because I always talked about intimacy. So if it wasn't a physical problem, it was usually a problem with intimacy. So let's just talk about intimacy a little bit. So intimacy has a lot to do with being present for another person. So just like I would talk about in skills or theories or other classes, um, how often do we get 100% of somebody else's attention? We're looking at our cell phones. We're thinking about something negative that happened before this moment, or we're thinking about something we have to do later, after this moment. But one of the few places that people get 100% of somebody's attention, where somebody's truly present for them, is hopefully in a counseling session. And they're not used to that. But one of the things that I've noticed is that couples that are having any type of problem with sexuality, if there's not a physical cause, intimacy is usually involved in that, or a lack of intimacy. So when we use the word intimacy, most people think sex, but intimacy is so much more than sexuality. So intimacy is giving somebody your full attention, being present for them, caring about them, uh, you know, mutual love and respect, being able to communicate with them. So all of those things I mentioned first have to be met in order for appropriate communication to take place. And I wouldn't even start communicating about sexuality because usually there's a lot of other things they need to communicate about first before they even get to that point. It's almost as if they're getting to know each other fresh. Uh, so, so much of this uh, has to do with once you find this intimacy, then communicating about various aspects of our lives, truly getting to know another human being. After, 6 weeks of all of this, we finally get to the problem that they came to counseling for, whatever the sexual problem is. And when we begin to talk about human sexuality, the same problems occur in sexual relationships as they do at a dinner table. And, people are not present for the other person. So true intimacy isn't created between the two people. A lot of things could inhibit that intimacy. So if people are fantasizing about, I don't know, pornography or another person or something else, uh, they are not present for the person they are with intimately. And that's a big problem in today's society. So if you can't be present for something in that moment, what type of relationship is it really? So we talk about all of these things, and a lot of people have issues uh, with what true intimacy is. Um, so uh, I think that's where most of the counseling goes. when we're talking about relationships or human sexuality or things like that. I've just found that that's often missing, and people don't even understand what true intimacy is in our current society. So, um, yeah. So, any comments or questions kind of about that view in general, or thoughts or comments? I thought this would be a big conversation. Are you comfortable talking about this? I don't know. All right. So,
Um,
um, all right.
quick
So
question.
then let's talk about um let's talk
Uh,
about go ahead. Somebody want to say something? Go ahead, Fritz.
yeah, I just had a question. Like, can you hear me by the way?
Yep.
Okay. Say you're working with a couple, right? Who's having an intimacy issue, and the person who's doing most of the complaining and the one who's presenting the issue is the cause of it, but they're just refusing to own up and understand. Like their insight is relatively low. They're not really understanding the problem that they're bringing forward. How would you go about handling that?
So there's a lot of different exercises that I give them as homework that teaches them different aspects of intimacy. It could start with something simple like, um, oh, let's see. Okay. Something simple would be, let's say there's a couple and there's children and everybody's tired because of work and taking care of kids and school and everything else. Um, and they've never learned to be truly intimate with each other, and now they're tired and don't have the time. Okay. So it may be very simple. And, if this isn't possible, we come up with another idea. But we kind of go back to the dating stage before kids, before sex, all of that. And we walk through kind of that process again. But think about it this way: when people first meet each other, um, you know, it's not just intimacy. There's all types of attraction, you know. And how often do we really get to know whoever our partner is intimately before sexuality comes up? And so it's almost like a redo, you know? So I give them assignments that might sound simple, you know? Uh, they find a babysitter or a relative to watch the kids. They have a date night, they can bring their phones in case there's an emergency, but that's it. Just for an emergency with the kids. No phones. They have to go to some place where they're required to talk with one another. And um, the talking is not just about how's your day? Oh, I can't believe, the kids were so rough. Oh, my job was so. No, they have to actually be interesting for the other person. What are some things that they wouldn't normally share with the other person's likes, dislikes, dreams? Um, and so this is a little hard to describe to them, but it's not it's not difficult to do. Most of them can do this. But I also have exercises like they're kind of corny, but they can do it in the office with me. They can, um, I have a list of questions that help them get to know each other at a deeper level. And maybe you've heard of this before, but they have to sit face to face. They have to stare at each other's eyes and they ask the questions, and each of them answers the questions. So it's really basic things at first, but it becomes more advanced and more intimate as time goes by. In a way, it first sounds kind of corny, but they really do enjoy it because me assigning this as homework gives them an excuse that they normally don't take for themselves. Oh, we're too busy to do that. There's too much going on with work and home and everything else. I don't have the time to do that. This forces them to take the time, and they don't just go to a movie and sit silently as they watch the movie. They can do that at home on the couch uh, with Netflix. So it forces them to not only take the time for one another, but it structures that time in a way where their attention is on the other individual. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
What else?
Hey, Professor, I have a question. It's not exactly sexuality related, but it's, I guess, about couple therapy in general. Um, but when it comes to relationships and you're trying to help a couple through it, for a lot of behavioral goals, oftentimes the objective is very clear. You kind of know, oh, if you're misbehaving in class, then you want to decrease certain behaviors. But when you're going to a relationship and you're trying to counsel them through it, um, as a therapist, how do you balance the conflicts of interest and even the goals of the clients who might be saying like, well, we want to make this work, but maybe you're working through it and it's like, well, maybe that's not what's best for them. Maybe one partner wants to really make it work. The other one's kind of seems like maybe what's best for them, isn't it? How do you kind of do that tango and sort that through the process? Do you start with their goal, what they think they came in with, even if things seem to look like it would go somewhere else? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a good question because um, now in today's society, uh, couples are a little more in tune with wanting to make it work and are a little more agreeable to going to counseling early. But so when I started this, I would say about 75% by the time they got to couples counseling, it was pretty much over. It was a last ditch effort just to say they tried. So it was really difficult. You had to have an invested couple that both parties wanted to make it work. Today, I would say about half have not reached that point, and they want to prevent that from happening. So they're really open to therapy. Um, so the interesting thing is that so many couples that I see, I also refer them for individual therapy because they never got individual therapy before they ended up in a couple, and they should have. We all have our individual issues, and if we don't resolve them before we enter into a relationship, they're going to play out dynamically in that relationship. So, um, and the thing is, you know, everybody's temptation into going into therapy, if I refer them from couples therapy, is to talk about the other person. They will not be allowed to talk about the other person. This is only about working on themselves. So there's kind of that saying that um, before we have a relationship, uh, we have to kind of be a person that we'd like to be with, and then we'll automatically attract a spouse we're compatible with. So, but most don't do that. Um, the other thing I think is I had another thing. Well, if I think of it, I'll share it.
And sir, and do you refer because you don't want to be influenced by the bias of having like that interest already with them and the other perspective and any worries on their end instead
So
of working with them
yeah,
individually as well?
yeah. So honestly, I don't know what the ethical code says today. But back when I started, I could only see if they came to me as a couple, I see them as a couple. Every now and then I could see them as an individual, but in the framework of couples therapy, not as individual therapy. So if I wanted to see them in a different framework or wanted them to be seen, I had to refer them to another counselor. Yeah. So it was kind of then it was the ethical thing to do. So I still do it. Yeah. Um, yeah. Um, so let's just talk about human sexuality in general. Um, so one of the things that has occurred over many years, basically throughout the 1900s and the early 2000s, is that people um, find labels for personal gender identity. And individuals find comfort in that. Oh, well, I'm not straight. I'm not something else. I am this. And now I have a comfort level because that's who I am. I have an identity. Whereas I didn't feel I had an identity with those other labels. So I think this progress has been helpful. I think, you know, individuals being able to identify themselves as some gender identity that they are comfortable with helps individuals to, uh, I don't know, feel, I don't know, when they might have felt excluded or not fitting in because they didn't feel as though they fit into like, I'm a heterosexual, you know, now I have a, an identity. I feel like I fit in. This is who I am. So that's very helpful. Um, However, one thing that uh, most scientists and biologists now feel, and it's kind of my way of thinking, is that gender identity, um, there are literally billions of possibilities. Because if you take just kind of a line, and we have like, you know, heterosexual at one end and, homosexual at the other end. And then there's all different gender identities in between that we have labels for. But within each of those labels or types of gender identity, every human being is slightly different. Okay, each of us is slightly different. Within the label of heterosexual, there are millions of possibilities within that gender identity. Within the homosexual gender identity, there are millions and millions of possibilities along that line. And everyone is slightly different because each one of us has been created uniquely, uh, whether it be in the womb, uh, because of, you know, uh, basically chemicals that were introduced while we were in our formation. Um, uh, Other factors, as we were born and grew up through puberty, there are so many different variables, but each one of those variables makes a human being unique in some way. So if I was going to say, oh, I'm a heterosexual, well, what does that really mean? We all have different levels of, testosterone and levels of hormones and how they interact in our brain and how they interact in our bodies. And it's really an infinite line of possibilities. So, yes, when I see people, they might self-identify as a known category that we have today, but I really want to learn about them holistically as a unique individual. So I see every individual as not only a unique person in general, but as a unique gender identity in and of themselves. So, and, of course, I'm totally accepting of whatever that might be. um, non-judgmental, accepting, you know. So, uh, I just think that sometimes gender identity labels are extremely helpful because it helps an individual feel as though, yeah, I belong. This is my identity. But in another way, I find them limiting because I believe there are so many possibilities that the possibilities are literally endless. And that we're each so unique that sometimes these things inhibit us from learning about an individual holistically and completely for who they are as an individual. So that's kind of a slightly different take on the subject. I just think it allows for more possibility in who an individual is, and whatever that ends up to be, great for them, you know. Uh, so what do you think about that kind of concept? And it's okay if you don't agree with me. Yeah.
I think that the need for labeling and trying to find uniqueness in something is one of our many flaws as a society. I feel like this is kind of an issue where, in current, like women are just, for example, we should be teaching how to not get raped. We should be teaching them not.
Yeah.
So I feel like in this example, it should be we should be teaching society not to place so much emphasis on labeling
Or judging, yeah. Labeling and judging.
instead of trying to counsel people on forming and finding that label within themselves, because it's oftentimes a lot harder and you run into the risk of people just wanting to be just be unique, or them needing some unmet attention that they haven't had. It kind of eliminates those like comorbid factors, right? But yeah, I really dislike labeling a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem with the DSM, Is it a diagnosis? Is it a label? Is it something in between? What else? Anybody have their own take on it that you want to share? Oh, yeah, sorry you couldn't hear him. All right, so basically, um, when I'm, yeah,
Oh, sorry. I have a question as far as um, how do you? So, like, I think sometimes labels. I think you kind of said too. It can be limiting. It can be empowering. It can be attractive, and then it can be misguiding. Um, how do you sort that when an individual comes into your practice and um, I guess they already have in their mind what the solution is. Maybe they think that's what's best for them is to find the right label, or maybe it's nailing down exactly how they fit or don't fit things, but maybe that's part of a different unhealthy coping behavior towards something else. How do you sort that out with the client, and how much leeway? And I know a lot of that also comes down to people's beliefs. So how do you filter out the belief aspect of it, both as the therapist and the client, to try and get at what behaviors are being helpful and not helpful for that client, and then redirect or adjust back towards what they were originally thinking afterwards?
If
Yeah.
I could, if I
Go ahead.
could add on to that question, I mean, because that's a good question, especially as like counselors are going to definitely encounter this. Let's say a client like comes to you discussing like sexuality and what it means to them, but after they talk about it a bit more, it's made very clear to you, the counselor, that there may be a deeper issue, but they present it in such a way that bringing up the potential of another issue may cause them to like have a very like, what's the word, volatile knee-jerk reaction. And then now you look like the bad guy because you're like, I don't know, it's something that happens a lot nowadays. But you try to let them know that this may be signs of a deeper issue, and they react very negatively.
So I usually don't try to combine those two things. I keep them separate. So, like, for instance, if somebody comes to me and they say, "Hey, uh, I want to explore my sexual identity and better understand that," I say, "Great. I'll walk with you on that journey, wherever that may lead." And I think my focus is more on building trust, knowing that I'll accept them for who they are, helping them to accept themselves for whoever that might be. That's the counseling side of it. I can help them figure out their own gender identity, but it's more important to accept themselves unconditionally. And when I say accepting self unconditionally, it means whatever gender identity they arrive at, and then maybe they'll change their mind or refine it or whatever happens, it's okay. That's the crux of, therapy. Um, and and so I really want to help an individual to get to that acceptance of self, and then to fully believe that they deserve unconditional acceptance and positive regard for others. And if they're not receiving that, that's not about them. That's about bias and prejudice. So, I think those are the two most important aspects of that, wherever it might lead. And but along with Fritz's question, I've had people who, are searching for different types of identities, whether it be gender identity or other aspects of who am I, but they've also experienced severe trauma and other might have other issues. They might have a diagnosis. Um, so I deal with each of those things separately. I don't combine them. If there is a link, they'll discover that through therapy. But I'm not going to push that upon them, you know. Uh, so I think as we process a diagnosis, trauma, gender identity, as we begin to process each one separately, they may see links or themes, but that's up to them to see, you know. And then I'll support them with whatever they discover and help them process it further. So, you know, I really don't make those decisions. So What else? So, my goal for this class, you're gonna watch my recorded lecture on this subject. But my goal for this class was to kind of maybe give you some different views or insights on this subject, talk about my concept of intimacy and infinite possibility and personal identities, and talk about acceptance, self-acceptance and believing that we have uh, you know, um, the right to be accepted by others for who we are. So I think those are like my key foundation for counseling, uh, and not only sexuality, but any kind of counseling, really. So it kind of goes beyond this. But I also kind of wanted it to be kind of a frank conversation and let you ask basically whatever you want. So other than things I brought up, any other things you're wondering about counseling and human sexuality or
One
oh,
other thing I thought of, oh, sorry, um, was I had another therapist before say something along the lines of, and I don't know, there's different takes to this, but they're saying that they were supporting the client in their goals through therapy of what was best for them in their life beyond their own personal beliefs. So they were saying they had a client that was looking to have an affair on a business trip, and they were kind of going back and forth on pros and cons, and um, what the benefits are, and then even maybe how that would go about happening. Um, where do personal beliefs and things like that begin and end in counseling, or how would you navigate that if there was something that you didn't feel necessarily was helpful in a long-term perspective, or you just disagreed with a behavior, but um, how do you check yourself if you decide I'm going to go forward anyway with this client? I think I can help them even if I try and take my own beliefs out of it. How do you check yourself along that process just to make sure that you are doing your best to help that client?
so um I go all the way back to kind of the Gloria tapes with Carl Rogers and Gloria, and Gloria struggles between kind of like uh, sexual urges and regrets, but really wanting to be kind of the good person, however she defines a good person to be. And she's saying, well, these two parts of me don't fit, you know, the part that, has these desires, and then the part of me that really wants to be what she sees as her ideal person. And Gloria wanted Carl Rogers' approval for what she believed to be um, maybe not good for her, you know. So my answer to the question is I'm not going to condone anything that could hurt another person, even emotionally. So if an affair would hurt a significant other, I'm not going to condone that. I'm not going to chastise a client, but I'm not going to give them my permission to do it either. So it's their decision, and we're going to look at all of the possible outcomes, regrets, advantages, whatever the client needs to talk about. But it's not up to me to give them permission to do it. So that's the key point. And that's usually what they're looking for, somebody to tell them it's okay. Yeah, and that's not up to a therapist to do. Now's the time for some interesting questions or comments. All right, well, it's okay to disagree with me. I hope I've been, I don't know, sensitive to everybody's point of view, I guess. I don't want to offend anybody or, you know, so I hope I was. Uh, and if not, hey, tell me, please. So, all right. There's no more questions. We're done for this evening. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your week.
Yep.